I will apologize several times probably because I am one of those weak beings that gets sick in the winter. And so I'm cold became bronchitis, and then I tend to go toward pneumonia. And there's a betting pool that this trip will do it. So I don't know how long my voice will last. And if I start coughing and I'm only to my knees, then don't worry about it. I'll get over it. But if I do fall over, then start talking amongst yourself about something. I will apologize as well to the woman who was on the phone outside before the conference started because I had one of my fits, and I ran outside so that nobody would have to experience it, and she did. So, and I know she's here, and I don't see her. Maybe she left. Really sorry if that happened. So thank you for coming. You've got 3 experts speaking. It gets better as the day goes on, so stay with them. Actually, can we go to the one that has all of them?
Oh, yeah, or I don't know.
Yeah. It's the little thing. It's the little button over here. The one that shows all of the... I'm asking him to do this because when I had that coughing fit at about 1, I took my codeine cough syrup. So I knew it would be kicking in about now, and I don't remember what I was going to say. So, and are you... Yeah, see, I was hoping he wouldn't be at the camera. Do I have one with, like, little blue pictures? Keep going. Yeah, okay, that's enough. So we can go back to slide view. Oh, I'm supposed to have this. And I don't know what Scott's going to say, but he's really good at this stuff. And a lot of what I've learned is from reading Scott's work. So thank you for your contributions to the field. I'll start by giving you a perspective of SSTI and where we fit within the realm of regional economic development. That introduction that Dan was kind enough to read, it was so full of jargon, and I probably wrote it at one point. And that's one of the real problems that the economic development space, particularly the tech-based space, has. Oh, and she's taking pictures too. Is that we speak a language to ourselves that the businesses don't understand or don't care about and shouldn't really. So part of what we're trying to do with Ryan is figure out a way to bring this kind of conversation about how we change regions, activities to support growth, to be more meaningful for the folks that are actually doing it. So I'd like to start by asking how many people are from government or nonprofits that are working in the economic development space. Yeah, so about half, and that's what I figured it would be. So, you're my peeps. You're the people that I've worked with for 30 years. 15 years of it from the state economic development side, working when the tech-based economic development space was young, new, 80s, 90s. And it was very research and university intensive at that point. We were thinking we needed to get our universities more engaged in the innovation economy. Nobody called it that then. And then for the last 15 years, I've been fortunate enough, I guess, to work for a think tank, SSTI, that's also kind of the trade association for that group. And we were formed because the science and technology advisors of 36 governors around the country said we need some sort of central convening organization that can be nonpartisan because so much of their job is political, as well as to coordinate interactions with the federal government. And then as things developed and more regions and communities and universities became involved in the economic development side of innovation, they said, well, we want to be part of you too. And we're like, all right, fine, we don't have a membership program, but great. You're welcome to give us money. And took on a kind of your public, or national public radio, PBS, you give us money because you like us, kind of thing, you want us to be around. Very non-sustainable model, if anybody's here from PBS. But So we've got the nonprofit thing down. So instead, we depend a lot on federal grants, like a lot of you do. And part of what my work for the last 5 years has been funded by the federal government to kind of look at how regional economic development needs to change, or could change. So, I'll start by, I've got the controller. I was waiting for you to do something. The right button? Yeah. All right, so I've said kind of all of this. A lot of jargon in here. That's enough. You get the sense we're a nonprofit. Oops. So what do we do? And we give away almost everything. So if you're at all interested in trying to keep track of the best practices or the new approaches, the trends of what is happening in the state, local, university, innovation-based economic development space, you're welcome to subscribe to our newsletter or to go to ssti.org, look at it, comes out each week, and just, every single issue is archived on our website, ssti.org. We also do put on an annual conference. Everybody in the world is allowed to come. Members get a little discount, which is great. Members also are able to contact us for doing some research and policy analysis for them. Then we also, most of our money comes, as I said, from federal grants. Anybody familiar with a NIST program called the Manufacturing Extension Partnership? Yeah, Scott, I figured, okay, just a couple. The national program in Alaska actually, I think, is just in the development stages of participating in this, and I'm concerned that your budget situation may prohibit you from going forward with it. But it's a national resource, been around since the 80s, 90s, excuse me, to help manufacturers to become more competitive through the application of innovation. And they've got a national network, states match it, industry matches the funding. They fund us pretty heavily to keep track of manufacturing policy and to provide coordinating assistance with them around the country. We do a little bit of advocacy work to try to increase the federal government's the flexibility and the pot of money that's available to support your regional activities. I will mention one thing that we're happy that's happened that Juneau has got to figure out how to tap is the Economic Development Administration, and is the EDR here from EDA? Anybody from EDA here? Oh, no? Oh, good. Except for it's being filmed. Juneau doesn't get a whole lot of this money, as Brian's told me, and part of that may be because things are too good for you guys as far as the Economic Development Administration is concerned. Your employment rate isn't bad, or unemployment rate, excuse me. Your average wages, you're not a distressed area. And one of the problems that we've recognized at SSTI, you have too, is that that's a large pot of money that goes to support economic development that isn't available to regions where things are actually working well. So we were able to help convince Congress to appropriate $10 million of their budget to be used in their regional innovation program that doesn't have that distressed region requirement. And so you are eligible to compete for funds or funding for that to support your cluster initiative activities. Another area is the SBA's, the Regional Innovation Clusters Initiative, which I don't know, you guys haven't gotten any money from this yet, I don't believe. Small Business Administration. They had $1 million to play with last year. Congress kind of said, oh, we don't like you going or venturing outside of your traditional structure, and then turned around and gave them $6 million to do it this year because it was working. And that's another pot of money specifically around clusters that we've got to figure out how Juneau can tap that. And during my mini session, we can talk about ways to do that if you guys want. And then the last of these is the Regional Innovation Acceleration Network, RIAN. And that started, I don't know what the next one, yeah, I know what it is. I'll get to that. All right, so from the economic development, the public prosperity improvement perspective, there are 4 verticals, 4 silos. This is the world according to Mark, which I used to call it the gospel according to Martin, and realized that probably been copyrighted. But and you will hear a lot of judgment and opinion in what I'm saying, and it's just my opinion. It's nobody else's. And I'm used to having people be able to push back right away in, like, whatever you want to say. This many people, it's a little hard, but feel free to write stuff down, challenge me, we can talk later, because I'm a little nervous about this presentation because a lot of the thinking that I've been doing over the last 5 years, sadly, is tailored to larger regions, right? Like so much of our economic development policy and so much of our national policy, it's geared toward cities, it's geared toward large population areas. And I'm finding too, you know, smaller communities, rural places, you guys don't think so much in these silos because you'd get stuff done. You know, you've got fewer resources, people wear several hats, you just try to get stuff done. Unfortunately, our federal government is structured along these 4 silos. We've got federal agencies that are specifically in each one of these guys. And then we have trade associations within each of these that are working to make sure their silo or vertical remains the top dog in their space. And we have foundations like in the community development and workforce development. Those have been around since the 30s, right? Tons of money going here. We've got a lot of foundations that work in that space. So when they recognize we need to start changing, their first thought is we go to the organizations we've been working with and try to make them more innovation-based or something like that. But they don't have the acumen or the mindset that the businesses in this room do. And that we end up kind of not wasting money, but we're not being as efficient with our resources as we could be. And then the economic development space, the same thing. Any of you members, actually don't raise your hand. The largest economic development association, IEDC, International Economic Development Council. A couple thousand members across across the globe. Recognizing that innovation and technology are important, they've come up with, you know, we don't want to be measured by job creation anymore. So they came up with a metric of, or a book of over 250 different metrics that they say these are economic development. Well, it's all of this stuff. So that we've got an issue of not necessarily mission creep, but challenges of trying to coordinate our our public investments in encouraging regional improvement within organizations and structures that are vertically oriented. And SSTI has been locked in this space for the last 15 years. You know, we work with universities, and I will say, as an aside, the numbers that you've already come up with at the University of Alaska for commercialization, those are incredible. I wanted to start the applause on that. And so you guys should be talking to them. All right, so if I move. Ohio State University, one of the big guys, they do stuff other than play football, but they would love to have the kind of numbers that you have in commercialization. They're horrible at it. Are you recording this? They have never been able to get their act together well enough to come up with those kind of metrics in that kind of short timeline. So there's stuff happening there in your university system that you guys should be taking advantage of. So in 2 ways, you know, those non-disclosure agreements, you should be talking to them to help them understand these are the needs you have for innovation or problems that you need to solve, as well as looking at the technologies that they have available for you and helping them understand, all right, yeah, this one's not ready for market, or this could work, or just increase that communication. And I think you're already doing, or you have done some of that in the past. So kudos to you guys on that. Those are great numbers. And Adam, are you going to Autumn?
My colleague Shelby Mathis will be going.
Okay.
She's our IT director. I work on the business side, so we switch off on years.
No, that's a shame. Okay, good. I'll look for Shelby. All right, so Ryan trying to do 3 things. Better understanding of our regional economies. What's the other? broaden the ownership of the investments that are being made. And here talking primarily around how do we get foundations in the private sector more ownership of the economic development agenda. And again, I think your cluster initiative, the Juneau Economic Development Council is ahead of the game in this, but we've got to get more resources, I think, invested. You need to own more of the agenda, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then how do we get bigger impacts out of it as well? And so I will say I've funded entirely for the last 5 years by the Economic Development Administration, and which has been very nice of them. And I'm always confused as why they keep doing it, because I will say things about how poorly our federal programs are designed to work with you guys, but they're willing to let me stir the pot. And I guess probably because but so none of my comments, what'd I do? Okay, none of my comments represent the federal government. All right, so those 4 verticals, and you guys know that structure damn it, sorry. Those 4 verticals, they're not working. And at a macro perspective, and maybe it's not an issue here, but I think it is for larger Alaska, our poverty rate in the community development is horrible. The inequalities, the housing issues, which I know is an issue here. The workforce, the unmatched skills and unemployment as well, an increasing amount of the population that's dropping out of the workforce. Job creation numbers are actually pretty good right now, but and then the 4th one being tech-based economic development. There's an elitism and an intellectualism to innovation that we need to help try to break down that barrier, and I think Scott does a good job of that. So all of these issues are out there, and you can read that on your own, but there's a lot of things that are forcing change, and you guys have the added one of an incredible state fiscal budget situation that you brought on yourselves, but you know that. All right. Oops. What'd I do? Yeah, all right. So we all know innovation is pervasive across all of those sectors. That's the piece of it that everyone in all of those verticals is struggling with, is they need to be more innovative, they need to apply technology, and as a result, there are commercial opportunities in each of those. That your clusters, it may be tough for an ocean products cluster to think of how they fit in the community development space, but you do, and we need to help think about that. In prep for this, reading the economic development plan, I think, or study that you did in 2010 or 11, Brian Kelsey did for you, the survey of businesses of the issues, the limits to your growth, were a number of the same issues that are priorities for the Juneau Economic Development Plan that the mayor mentioned. Housing for your employees, and the cost of energy, and shipping and freight. But then when you look at your cluster initiatives, they don't have anything to do with that. And to me, that's part of the systems jump that we need to do. If those are common issues for keeping your employees here or for growing your company because of those costs, then why aren't those a priority for your clusters as well as for the city government? And so how can we start to address some of these issues across a larger agenda through the cluster structure? All right, so all of those sectors are merging, but our policy structure doesn't support that. And what we're finding is that this merger of economic development policy, or the merger of regional improvement, is requiring different kind of structures. And I think I agree entirely with the Lieutenant Governor's comments. We probably have a different conclusion in policy as a result of our positions. But we need different ways of approaching the problems that are happening. And I think the characteristics of the organizations that need to be created, or the approaches that we adopt, and our cluster initiatives, our nonprofit organizations, our state agencies, come along three different kind of priority areas. And I'm going to go into a little of these for you in a second. All right, so that's essentially what I'm saying. We have to shift from policy. We have to shift policy from thinking about institutions, organizations, and structures into thinking about what we want to accomplish. And if we start from what we want to accomplish, as opposed to how do we get funding for this particular program, then we're able to start breaking down some of those issues of structures and barriers. Again, rural places, I think, do this better than others, just by need. All right, so this one I don't particularly like, but I may stir the pot a little here. Everybody's got a map, or, here's what your economic innovation system looks like. Everyone's got those kind of structures and models. Ryan does too. Ours came up, we did it through peer-based discussions of the organizations around the country that we thought were doing a good job of regional innovation, asking them what were the priorities or needs that they had. Or how were they structured? What did they look at within their region to come up with their structures? And they had identified originally 15. Those are on our website. You can look at it, regionalinnovation.org website. That part's not really important. And then we're now narrowing or bringing it down to 12 because there's some overlap. I don't particularly like the graphic, but what we are arguing, and if Scott wants to respond to it later or if agreement, we're arguing that all innovation within a regional economy, there are two fundamental structures and mindset that are required to accomplish that. And everything else builds off of that. And that is, it's the entrepreneurship, the acceptance of risk in your community. And then the second piece being financing that will go along with that risk. So places, one of the things that we're seeing is, and then the network piece of it being absolutely critical, the relationships of the entities or elements within the system playing together well. One of the challenges for most state capitals in the country, particularly those that are geographically isolated or in smaller communities, but Columbus, Ohio, with 1.7 million people is equally guilty of this, is because so much of the population is connected to government, that risk tolerance is low. That's just not in the mindset of the employees in government. You've got a job, and you're accountable for public dollars, and so risk is diminished as much as possible, and all your federal agencies as well that are here. So I think that's the biggest hurdle for a region to overcome, a capital region to overcome. The other challenge related to that is those places where I've talked that, like in the Deep South, where they were very dependent on earmarks for the longest time from the federal government to support all of their economic development activities. So when that went away, they were struggling with how to keep going. Or economies in the Southwest, New Mexico primarily, where there are very large Department of Energy installations, and their whole economy is based on those. And they look to those to design and influence their economic development policy. You have the same issue here, obviously, with oil. And the paternalism, and this isn't new to you guys, right? The paternalism that comes from moving to such a strong dependence on one sector for your financing, for your policy, for your whole economy. So the investments you're making here are wonderful, but as long as the mindset is that we don't have to worry about and pay for government ourselves, because the oil money pays for that, or we don't have to pay for the agenda, we've got to find other people to pay for the stuff we want to do, then we don't have the ownership, I think, of that risk that we need to. And so one of the challenges or things I'll throw out there for your cluster meetings tomorrow or in the future is which of your initiatives that you're not doing now that you could add, can you actually have direct ownership of within your cluster community? And you own all of them right now, but a lot of them appear, looking at them, that they're, we want more access to land, or we want to try to find funding for this or that, or grow this. That's not really ownership. That's you're shifting the activity to another entity or organization. And so if you can, and Brian and I haven't had a chance to talk about this, so I could be completely off base, and you'll have the chance in a few minutes to tell me that. But I'm curious about how much of the cluster strategies are being financed by the cluster organizations themselves, and the outcomes that you're expecting from it. Are you building companies or ventures out of these that you guys own, or are you really just kind of tweaking around the edges of what you're already doing to try to keep doing what you're doing, if that makes sense? And financing. I'm surprised, given the area doing as well as it is compared to the rest of Alaska, that there isn't a seed investment fund here, and that there isn't, at least that I'm aware of, a community development finance, a CDFI. Do you have one? You do? Are you doing housing stuff? Are they here? Oh, it is? Pardon me? Okay. Because the housing issue in a lot of places, and it may not work here, but the housing issue in a lot of places, foundations have figured out how to use the CDFI model to address lower income housing, because the foundations don't have the profit margin required because of the tax advantages they have. And so it seems like that's an area that either the council or the CDFI and the foundations, community foundations, and I'm happy to talk to you about that too. It won't necessarily solve everything for you, but it seems like an opportunity in that space. All right, this one's really messy, and this, we won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but what I'm trying to do is figure out how do we move from understanding our regions, not from the accomplishments of or how do we design our policy for our regions, not from the accomplishments of our organizations, but from the capacity of the region to address the needs within that innovation system. So, and there's a lot of jargon in that. And this is my first attempt at trying to model it. And it doesn't work because but it's supposed to be a bullseye. And if you take the different regional assets, and for purposes of legibility, I only put 8 of them on here, but commercialization, R&D enterprise, that's the university and the private sector research capability, the connections being the networks, entrepreneurial acumen, the ability to think and work in the business space, innovation capital, human capital, physical infrastructure, production, distribution. If we can figure out how to map the capabilities of within the private sector, the nonprofit, and the government sector for each of these, and then if we can figure out how to measure where that capacity resides and the viability of it, then we can start thinking about, all right, are we actually developing the capacity in the right place? And so in this particular example, commercialization here, this purple wedge at about 7 o'clock, most of the capacity in this example resides within the public sector, the darkest wedge. And then the middle one is nonprofit, and then the smaller wedge toward the center is the private sector. And there are communities where this is true, where the capability to think about commercialization and to provide those kind of services resides very much in the public sector. And And those organizations are doing everything they can to make sure that they get more funding each year to continue that. And they're using an argument of, look how important we are to your economy because of the services we're providing. And if we think about this, and this is where Lieutenant Governor and I agree, we have to kind of step back and think about that, and that doesn't make sense. The public dollars should be going toward developing the private sector capacity to provide those services. And we're not doing that. So is there an SBDC representative in the room? Small Business Development Center? Good. The structure, this was a program created in early 1980s by the Small Business Administration to provide entrepreneurial support, business support to startup and mom and pop kind of businesses around the country. Free service. A very structured program. Several hundred of these are across the country. And they're able to talk about all of the companies they are creating. But what we're doing by placing $100 million each year into that program, 110, is we're not developing the capacity of the region to support itself in that. So how do we move, if we look at the region's capacity to address the innovation, the different assets, then how do we tailor public investments to move more of it into the right kind of area? The same for equity investments. A lot of groups, a lot of public dollars are going across the country are going into high-risk, early-stage capital. And regions are, and they're saying, look, we have to be doing this because nobody else is. But at the same time, they're not designing those programs so that the private sector will take in that capacity. So I'd love to see you start developing, no matter how small it is, some sort of angel organization here to start getting that kind of capacity going local, not up in Anchorage. All right, so what we saw, or what we're seeing, is that there is a hybrid kind of organization, and you don't have to be in the innovation space for this to make sense, I don't think. But we call them venture development organizations. And the venture piece of it is, it can be a technology out of a university. It can be an idea from an entrepreneur or startup. It can be it can be an individual who's got the acumen to support or to take the risk. But you're focusing on that venture and whatever it needs to take to get that venture to grow. And the lean startup model, and I don't know if you're planning on talking about blank stuff at all, ties in with this as well. The idea of moving stuff to product as fast, to test it as fast, to get the private sector, the market's perspective into the activity as much as possible, as quickly as possible. So venture development organizations, and there are probably about 120 of these around the country that would perhaps say, all right, yeah, we're one of these. There are probably about 40 of them that are any good. And again, some of those are SSTI members I'm talking about, but they are regionally based. So they have that spatial constraint, which when we start talking about a market intervention with public dollars, a lot of economists struggle with that right away because that's not what we're supposed to be doing, adding that kind of spatial constraint to it. But you guys want jobs to happen here, and that goes against a lot of economic thinking right there. They are systems aware. I already talked about that. I've talked about the venture focused. Here they're customer centric with a flexible delivery service. So as opposed to being very program structure and with a long timeline of what they're doing, they're tailoring the activities to the needs of the company. They have that risk investment capital component integrated, which is why I think you've got to figure out a way to get private money involved in the council's activities. Completely private sector leadership, and that can take many forms. Either the CEO of the organization comes from an entrepreneurial background, hopefully that's the case, or at least the C-level team does. That the private sector dominates the board, that it's a self-appointing board as opposed to a government appointing board, and that it doesn't have, that it has and accountability to a larger public than the board as well. And the outcome-oriented, that you treat this like a business treats the revenue coming into them on a quarterly basis or even a weekly basis, that you're focused on specific outcomes, being jobs created by your companies, the wages paid for those jobs, the revenues that they're making as well. Completely transparent, not completely, they're transparent and accountable, and they have a diversified funding base, which includes the public sector. And I can go into, well, yeah. So they have to be tailored to the region. So I've got a few examples for you that I think are relevant to Juneau, and maybe I'm wrong. And you can kick me off anytime. Okay. So the first one, this is to me one of the leanest mentoring programs in the country that's achieving some good results. Based in Boulder, Colorado, it's a nonprofit contract house, essentially, contracts with universities primarily, and has done an incubator and a federal lab in the past. Very little money. Has a network, or a mentoring network of over 1,500 advisors in Colorado and the rest of, and the western U.S. that are pulled on, triaged to look at the technologies and the faculty member or the inventor or researcher and figure out, all right, what's needed for this one to go forward, if anything, or how do we get this out of their hands or get them to stop working on it because it's not a viable product. So these are just some of the results, and this is over 5 years. Oh, sorry, it's over, the data now is, the data is from 2013, so over 6 years. And less than $3 million total spent on it. They can point to a number of very specific outcomes from their mentoring pool. And so the universities are contracting with these guys for maybe $50,000 to $100,000 a year. They put a half-time person in the university and then tap this network of external folks. And those mentors aren't paid, but they have the opportunity to either invest in the company if they want to, become part of the leadership team if they get excited enough about it, or just help it along the way to make the right connections if they want to. They're incentivized to participate or play because of that outcome. And that's, sorry, so the total team, there's 2 full-time people and currently 6 part-time staff. And they're working in 2 states at 6 institutions. This is the University of North Dakota Center for Innovation. I like these guys, and you may too, they've done the bootstrapping thing. They've been around since the mid-1980s. One guy at a university, Bruce Jovig, was tired of how little entrepreneurship was happening at the university, and created now has 2 incubators, several angel capital funds, the country's first all-run student-based venture capital pool. And again, they're doing this on maybe a budget of $500,000 a year. And in Grand Forks, North Dakota, he considers their region the western edge of North Dakota to the middle of Minnesota, which to me is comparable to some of the spatial issues that you guys have as well. And this is all pre-Bakken money. Oh, and so one of the things that they're doing, I don't know if you guys have looked, EB5, have you guys done any work with the EB5 program? This is where you allow some rich, or you shouldn't say you allow, the federal government will provide visas to wealthy foreign nationals who are willing to make investments of over $500,000 into an economic development project within a rural economy. And sometimes it's $1 million. A lot of these have been real estate plays. A lot of them have been less than satisfactory as far as the outcomes, but there is the potential to use this for injecting wealth or capital within your region that you may want to explore. And then the third one is in the applied research space, and that's thinking about this from the cluster, the research cluster. This is in Minnesota. They were recognizing the need to help their agricultural community understand there is important technology and innovation that's needed for farmers to stay competitive. So they provide research funds as well as commercialization funds to help make that match between the university researcher and the company or the farmer, which is a business. Those are the outcomes they've produced. They also have a job training component to it to help keep local folks connected to the companies and to see there's opportunity in agriculture. They are state funded, but also have a sizable foundation investment as well. And I think there's potential application to this model for the university piece that you could be doing as well. All right, so that's it. Thank you for not leaving and bearing with a pretty disorganized presentation. I think if you have questions, you can shoot them out. If not, thank you. No, don't do that part. And you don't have to ask questions. Don't feel forced to, because all the way in the back. You shout if you'd like.
You mentioned that actually VA has a source of funds that wasn't tied to sort of the distress economic justice, but I don't think the program.
Yeah, the pool of funds. The pool of funds is the. Oh yeah, sorry. She asked about the source of funds I mentioned from the Economic Development Administration that is not tied to distressed areas. And it's called the Regional Innovation Program. It is run out of the Office of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. It is brand new this year. They're still writing the rules for it, for the solicitation. I shouldn't say that. The first pot of money, there is an RFP that's on the street for it. And I can get you the specific details for it. It is part of, instead of the EDA enabling legislation, it's part of the Competes Act. And it has the most flexibility of any EDA funding. So our goal is to expand its percentage of the EDA budget regardless of how EDA is funded in the future. The SBA's pot of money, the regional innovation clusters, that bump up from $1 million to $6 million was completely unexpected by SBA. So they're in a bit of a scramble to figure out how to use that. And we're providing some advice to them about flexibility and the need for that money not to be tied to distress. And they seem to get that.
Yeah, hi, Joe Morrison, independent consultant. Mark, I was just wondering, you were talking a little bit about numbers and appropriate KPIs, especially in the tech transfer space.
Yeah.
And I did some venture development stuff, so it was beaten into me to watch out for NDAs. Can you talk about NDAs as a KPI? Right, so this is the idea is it good to have a bunch of non-disclosure agreements?
If the companies want that, then yeah, it is good.
Yeah.
Because it's the only way you're going to be able to work with them. Is it a good idea from the perspective of, are there universities that are becoming captive to companies? Yes, not necessarily because of the non-disclosure, but because of the money that's being tied to the non-disclosure. And that's absolutely horrible from a larger macroeconomic perspective. But universities in a lot of places are becoming more and more beholden to large corporations for their R&D activity. Biotech seems to be one of these in particular. So yeah, I don't encourage that per se. but I also know it's the only way certain people are going to play. So you have to recognize that's the game. There are some universities that are willing to decrease the cash or their role in the commercialization, in the outcome, in the structure of the deal. Some are actually almost giving it away, the technology. I doubt that's likely to happen in Alaska anytime soon because of the financial structure that the government or the fiscal environment that they're in. That's part of the problem that Ohio State has. They want too much of the deal. And they're pretty structured around non-disclosures, very heavy on the non-disclosures. But no, I don't think it should be necessarily a metric other than to show you've got the activity. So, but again, that's my opinion. Dan may have a different one. Any others? All right, thanks again for bearing with me.